Good morning and welcome. My name is Helen Haralambis and I'm one of the mathematics education consultants at the MAV, and together with my colleague.
Hi everyone, my name is Daniela Draskovic. I'm also a mathematical education consultant at the MAV. Today we'll be your room hosts. Our role will be to introduce presenters and sessions, answer any Q&A via the chat feature if needed, and provide any announcements. If you have any technical issues, please check your confirmation email for troubleshooting and who to contact for support.
Thank you. Okay, before I introduce our presenters for the session for this morning, I would like to thank Oxford University Press for supporting our keynote today. So let's begin. This is room 3, and our keynote presenters for this room are Adam Kruger and Scott Rumble. Adam Kruger is Head of Mathematics at Wesley College, Glen Waverley campus, and Scott Rumble is Senior School Leader at Parkdale Secondary College. Been involved in mathematical professional development for a number of years, both working in a number of roles from mathematics learning area leaders, numeracy leaders, curriculum development, year level coordinators, senior school leaders, acting assistant principals, and senior school curriculum. They've also been directors of the Casey and Catania Mathematics Network. Both believe that teaching and learning with warmth and enthusiasm, looking at the personal interests and strengths of their students, is a key to achieving great success. Their interest, experience, and expertise in educating students at all levels is reflected in their broad teaching and leadership career. Both are celebrated presenters who work extensively with students, teachers, and organisations in areas of leadership, data analysis, numeracy, and literacy development. Effective feedback strategies, restorative justice practices, accelerated learning, building connections outside the classroom, creative and critical thinking, learning styles, multiple intelligences, and cooperative learning. Adam and Scott have pre-recorded their presentation and will be online to answer any questions via the Q&A chat feature. Please welcome Adam Kruger and Scott Rumble.
Hello. As a middle school teacher, do you walk into the classroom where students are highly engaged in mathematics, where they're ready to learn, they're intrinsically motivated and see relevance and importance to what we are teaching and within the entire curriculum, where students are on task, they're punctual to classroom, and there's no attendance issues throughout the entire year? As teachers, you are looking forward and proactive in what you're teaching. You walk away knowing that you've challenged your students and that you feel personally that you've been challenged and able to set them up for success throughout the entire year.
On the other side, do you walk into the classroom and find the students are disengaged with their maths? Do they find the material irrelevant? Do they not want to complete their homework and set work tasks? Are they truant from class? Do they constantly distract others? Always ask, why do we need to learn this? Do they not feel challenged and interested in the classroom? And a big thing, do teachers not want to teach that particular class? Well, we're here today to talk to you about our STAR methodology and how you can incorporate that into the maths classroom.
And hopefully by the end of this session, you're able to start to get away from the scenario that Adam gave and head more towards the initial scenario that I had given. Hello, my name is Scott Rumble, and I'm the current Senior School Leader of Parkdale Secondary College.
Hi, I'm Adam Kruger, and I'm currently the Head of Mathematics at Glen Waverley campus at Wesley.
Together, we've had multiple years of experience in both student management and curriculum leadership roles.
You'll notice on the screen you can see the number of our roles, but you'll also notice that we have listed some of our interests. You can see that we are both big fans of movies and TV shows, love our music, huge sports fans, and we also like to try out some of these newest escape rooms when we can. These interests are really important to have to share with our students, and we're going to touch on that a bit later.
So why do students learn best in the classroom? From our past experience, we have found it's because of three main reasons. One, that they have voice in what they are saying. Do students come into a classroom where they want to learn and they want to learn about the various aspects of your curriculum, where students learn about particular skills, concepts, and content, and they see the importance into how that maps into the relevance of the real world, and also then the application about how that goes about the resilience to continue to improve their own ability and what you have gone about teaching them. That they feel challenged inside and outside of the classroom. So within that you're setting material that has rich assessment tasks that focus on skills, concepts, and overall content. So you're mapping that to the study designs or Oz curriculum. Making sure along the way that you're building those connections and applying what students' voice and interest are in that material so that they're able to see that relevance to the direct real-world applications that they're engaged in. And finally, are they motivated to learn? So by seeing that value and importance of the information that you are presenting as a teacher. So making sure that you're tracking their learning through extensive data analysis, and then most importantly, using this to then celebrate the success and review any misconceptions that students have along the way so that you're able to minimize gaps in their learning. So ultimately, when we get to the pointy end of our senior school curriculum, we're able to minimize all gaps in their learning.
So let me introduce you now to the 4 main steps for our STAR methodology. The first step being student voice. So in student voice, this is where we like to collect information and gain feedback from our students based on their interests and their ability. The second step is once you have that information, we like to predict and set up a journey for our students based on what they're interested in, so to keep that engagement aspect. The second step being translation. So translation is where we create these rich assessment tasks that relate the understanding to the real world. We like to differentiate in the classroom based on key skills and concepts and allow teachers to gain a focus of where their students are at in their learning. Achievement is where we like to set up an atmosphere in the classroom that students feel challenged and they're able to test their understanding and knowledge, and also implement some of these skills, these newly acquired skills that they learnt to these real-world applications. And the final stage is review. So this is where it's an important stage because it's really where we would look at the student growth, create intervention in regards to what skills maybe they fell down in, and also celebrate their successes. And celebrating successes may not be in a particular test, but it also may be allowing the students to take their understanding outside of the classroom and really instill their understanding and knowledge.
Student voice is becoming a more important and recognised crucial component of student success within our classrooms. Student voice is about empowering students not only within each and every class, but also within an overall curriculum. Student voice is proven to have proven success with increase in engagement in the student learning, about promoting teacher connection and building those strong relationships, and giving them a sense of belonging in that classroom. Because ultimately what we are trying to do and achieve is to have students become primary actors in what they are and have a say in what their curriculum and lessons look like. By doing this, we're able to create a positive environment and culture within your classroom, one where we can go about challenging students to take that next step and work outside of their comfort zone and have that resilience so when they see mathematic problems that maybe outside their current skill set, that they're going to build upon their tools that they have developed within their schooling to go have the ability to attempt, use that trial and error to be able to achieve success. Ultimately, this is then going to go about developing both personal and social capabilities so that we're building students who are going to be highly successful global citizens and know that they've had a voice and agency within each and every one of your classes and curriculum.
So Scott's given you a rundown a bit of the research behind student voice. As you can see here, this is how we implement student voice in our classroom, and other schools that we have worked with, how they would implement it in their classroom. So collecting is the first part of student voice. What we want to do is we want to create a safe environment in the classroom that allows the students to really share openly and quite freely about what are they interested in outside of the classroom and what are they interested in with their friends. We like to create some discussions with our students that are focused on maths, but also where maths may be inside and outside the classroom. It's really important that you identify these student interests because these are going to build the curriculum later on. Look, you may not find a common interest between the whole classroom, but you may find you have a number of interests, but at some point you're going to cover those interests later on, and we're going to give you a bit of detail on how we do that. Another thing we're going to also discuss a bit later is how we collect student feedback. There is obviously a number of different strategies in which you can use to collect feedback from your students. And we're going to go through how we collect their interests, but also the formative assessments we use to find out their ability. So ability is a huge thing as well. You don't want to just focus on their interests in regards to like maybe sports and movies and things like that. You want to make sure you find out where their weaknesses are in the mathematics and also their strengths.
And as Adam said, so it's about showing you the skills that we use, the tools that we've been using and implementing in our own classrooms to get success in student voice. It's about allowing those tools to come into your teaching, allowing the forums as such, the students have the avenues to be able to give you those interests and then able to then how you can identify, okay, I've collected these interests now. How can I go about transposing those into the actual curriculum that is outlined for us? So basically, when we're doing that, we're talking about that setting up of the journey. So how do you go about collecting those student voices? Look, we like to talk about a 3-step approach to this, where you go about predicting, exploring, and organizing the students' feedback. So after you've collated that data, what are we going to be doing with it? You go about logging that interest and then showing the connections to the outside world. So where is there engagement in real world application, and how can we then draw on the multitude of what we have or knowledge within that area so that students can see the real world mathematics that happens on a day-to-day basis that we just take for granted. And then finally go about, again, building those strong rapports and relationships with our students is going to be a key component of this. The better we can get with that, it limits the classroom behavior. We know that then promotes engagement within your classroom. It then goes also to help teachers really go about providing the avenue to have those challenging conversations with the students so you can continue to push them to strive for success.
Some of the key examples we like to use that I talked a bit about earlier to collect the interests where the students are interested in inside and outside of the classroom. So we have entrance slips, speed dating, using Kahoots, two-way talking, name games. I like to use particularly See Think Wonders in my classroom. That students really, they really enjoy that one. So it's about finding the key strategy that works for you. But we all know our students are different in the classroom, and some of these strategies may work for different students. So it's really important that you do have an array of strategies that you can implement. And you can see here, it's important to discuss your own interests with your students, not only so that they can find out what you're interested in, but also build that relationship and respect with your students so they feel, one, they can open up, but two, they're actually going to want to share and discuss these interests with you inside and outside of the classroom.
Just another thing before I talk about this next slide with that, it also gives you a chance, because you're an expert in your interests. So if some of those interests come up, you're able to then expand on the mathematics behind them within your interests. And we're going to talk about those in a little bit more detail a bit later on. And then if you get a team together, you're all able to bring different experiences and expertise to this to be able to really develop a highly rich curriculum with student voice.
The way we collect student ability, we use a number of different methods and strategies. The first one being, we always look at our NAPLAN and our on-demand testing. So a number of schools have that data at hand, and it's really good to find out the strengths and weaknesses of your students, because these are standardized tests and data that you can use on your whole cohort. As a math teacher, you're going to have professional knowledge. So using your own understanding of the content and where you feel the students may struggle, where they would find content quite easy and challenging, it's really important to have that understanding. Another huge a strategy that you can use as pre-testing and formative tasks. So focusing on the skills you want to cover in your assessments, creating little tasks. Some of them could be short tasks, some could be quite longer. But it's really important that you create these tasks at the start and give to the students at the start of the unit to find out their strengths and weaknesses. And the other big thing is to have ongoing feedback. So throughout a unit, it's important to, yes, have some formative assessment at the start, but continue using short, sharp strategies that I guess gauge where the students are at with their learning, because the last thing you want to do is move on with content and curriculum if the students haven't had a good grasp of what they were currently doing.
So within this student voice element, we're still trying to collect not only what their interests are, but overall where they're at along the entire journey within their curriculum. That's a key component with this. And a key way to do that is going to be through data analysis. It's about identifying the appropriate levels so that you can differentiate the material appropriately, so you can continue to challenge kids at various steps along your unit length. So we like to use a tool that we've developed, which you can kind of see here. If at any point you guys want any more information about that, again, towards the end, there's our contact details. You can reach out to us about that. But in short, we go about mapping this at both junior school and all the way up through to senior school level, where we can then break it down to the various levels that you can have. And then you can kind of see by this graph, you can very clearly distinguish various aspects of students' learning. So you can go about using this to define predictive, where you thought students would see what would be a difficult question to a hard question. You can then go about using things like the zone of proximal development, so you can clearly determine where the next stage of learning is, to go about scaffolding where your groupings might be through your high, medium, low, however you kind of have that set.
So this data tool Scott was talking about on the screen, it's based off a Gutmann chart. It just allows us to really, as teachers, to really use colours to identify the weaknesses and strengths of our students. We all understand that there are different levels of ability in our classroom, so it's important that when you create assessments and you review these assessments, you have that in mind so you can see the different levels of learning, and I guess also the different skills within topics. So that's what you can see about the key levels of learning. One of the areas in which we like to focus on in the senior classes in particular, because in primary years, you often have the opportunity to do groupings and groupings of students, but also activities. Whereas in secondary school, it can be quite challenging to have different groups within a classroom. So it's important that you can't necessarily have these individual groups, but you may be able to incorporate 3 groups in your class. So that's what we tend to focus on with our learning. We understand that we maybe have 5-6 years of growth levels of our students, but we try to break them down into 3 different levels using the zone of proximal development that Scott spoke about to identify the next point of learning for our students, and using this data tool from a formative assessment. So we've just put this data into this data tool from a formative assessment, which we use at the start of the unit. And you can see here, we've highlighted 3 different groups that we would like to have within our classroom. So you've got the lower group, the middle group, and the upper group. So it's important that now we take this information, take this feedback, and we use that within our assessments to make sure that we are not just creating assessments for that middle band of students or the upper band. We make sure we have open-ended tasks for the top-end students, but also multiple access entry points for our lower-end students.
That's right. It's about making sure that you're developing those individual learning plans so that all students have access to the curriculum at all points. And recognizing that students' strengths and weaknesses are going to, it's a roller coaster effect. They're continually going to be changing throughout every topic. So we're not always going to have the high group, the same set of kids, for example. In the high group, kids will fluctuate within those. Ultimately, a saying from Michael Jordan is that talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence wins championships. And what we mean by that is it's go about realizing that working as a team is going to achieve much better success than what you would be if you're going to try and do this in isolation. So, and by a team, it will be not only with your peers and your other teaching staff that you work with within that cohort level, but also within the classroom itself. The more we can have student voice in our classroom and the more say they're going to have, the more engagement you will achieve within that class, the more success you will have when you go about those challenging enrichment tasks. And ultimately, altogether, we will achieve success because our students are all going to, and teachers are all going to be working together to get the most for our students. So ultimately, when they leave your school, they're going to be able to have success in the senior school and get into their pathway of choice, which is ultimately why we're here as teachers.
Look, this statement obviously hits home for a number of reasons. Two of them as such being that, yeah, we are huge basketball fans, but also we wouldn't have got to where we are now without working together. So these ideas that we have developed came from our early days as teachers and working individually within our classrooms, working out what methods worked for us. And then we found the common interests between us and we decided to put our heads together and work together, like as you can see in that statement, and then it's kind of all developed from there. Down the bottom, it says working together with data, the three-step approach. So one of the things we like to focus on with data, so we're going to continue our journey with data before we get to the application tasks. It's important before you give application tasks, before you look at student data, before you look at how the growth of students, it's really important. The first stage is when working with teams is to activate and engage in the data. So it's really important to predict where your students are at before you look at the data. Okay, so not many teachers do that. I noticed that we obviously didn't do that when we first started. We would obviously give a test. Here are the results from our students. We grade it. We would put our data into maybe a data tool and look, okay, here are our strengths and weaknesses of our students. Great, let's move on to our next topic. And that really had a downfall because students were leaving that topic and not having covered all the key concepts, and there would be gaps in the learning. So the first thing to do is predict where your students would have challenges and where they would have successes, and make assumptions about why you think that happens. So that's in that first stage, activate and engage. The second one being explore and discover. So you want to have time with your team and individually to look at the data, look at where your students went wrong, where they had successes, and work together and make observations about that data before moving on to the organizing and integrating step, where you want to look at, okay, how can we take this information and put actions into place? Okay, so this is kind of the three-step approach that Scott and I have done, and we found it to be quite successful for us, working together when we used to work together in the same school, but also working with our current schools and schools in Victoria that we have worked with.
Yeah, so again, it's about getting a holistic understanding of where your students are along that entire journey of not only the year, but throughout each unit. And you're really about gathering that data so you can make decisions that are in their best interests. Listening, again, bringing back that student voice, listening to what they're saying to you about where their strengths and weaknesses may be or what they're finding difficult, and applying that into the data that you're collecting to see if they are saying is meaningful and obviously relevance to where they're actually at. That final little part, the organizing and integration of it, it's really about why did we get the results that you achieved? So, or did you get the results that you were expecting? So looking back at that prediction data, I was expecting question 3 to be quite an easy question, and yet my class said it was quite difficult. And if I was comparing that to then Adam's class, who said it was quite easy, was it the way that we taught it? Was it something that I may have missed? The language that I went about explaining it? So don't be scared. I would actually encourage those conversations within your peers. And that's really where our professional learning teams and the moderation process really has a great advantage within the schools, and how we're seeing a lot of success within that. Then also the next step would be that action part. How are you going to go create the next step for the action plans for implementation? So you've got all this data. How can you now apply it so that we can get further success for our students? And then most importantly, if anything, I would highly recommend once you do receive data, making sure you celebrate that success and show it to students. I think teachers are sometimes quite hesitant to show data to students, and even growth data or any form of data where you can kind of see it as a negative if they haven't achieved the growth that they would expect. Yet in the classroom and through my experience, I find it the opposite. By building a highly supportive and safe environment classroom and then showing them that data, it actually empowers them. It actually you can form a really positive, challenging culture within it where they're trying to achieve their personal best and they're not caught up on, I only achieve this and that negativity on that, rather than how can I get to that next stage of my learning to achieve success. All right, we're going to talk about a case study and how I've gone about applying this into a Year 9 mathematics classroom. So in this particular class, it was quite a challenging classroom where there were behavioural concerns. Students were very disengaged and often challenging and questioning myself as a teacher, but also the group of us about why we're going about teaching that particular content. The way that I went about gathering the student interest was through speed dating. So I set up a very quick activity to go about investigating those interest areas and collecting, and then go about collating those. And from that collating, we identified that movies was a key component. So one thing that we haven't quite touched on with student interest. So after you've gathered these interests, you're trying to identify, you've got a whole heap of these interests, you're trying to identify which ones have the most student interest. And if you can then use those particular topics and interest areas, you're going to get the most bang for buck as such, where the most students are going to be engaged within that material. So using the movies, either going to the movies, talking about movies, and obviously Netflix, Stan, etc. being such a big component at the moment, there was a lot of discussion around all those. So throughout that entire topic, we used entry and exit slips to go about using questioning about where they're at within the material. So I could always get formative feedback about how they're approaching the current curriculum that we are teaching. And this unit that I applied for movies was trigonometry. So at our team meeting, we talked about real world applications. So how are we going to talk? We've got the interest now of movies. How was I going to put this into practice to trigonometry? So it's about linking the key skills and knowledge, but also identifying the prior knowledge that they're going to be bringing into that classroom. And that's where that data was an important avenue of this, so that we could explore where the next point of the need is for our students. We then went about, one, predicting where our students would be getting, so what they would struggle with. So by breaking down the curriculum, going identifying certain topic areas and go, okay, this would be an exercise where we feel the students will need extra support. We also then went about using the actual data and where it showed us where students might need that support from. And then from that, we slowly started to develop an application task, which we're going to talk about a bit later on.
The case study that I'm going to talk about is a Year 8 team that I worked with at another school. And we found that we had students that had no challenging behavior, but they just were not connected with the content. So we would use the Would You Rather activity to, I guess, gauge what interests the students had. And as a team, we decided that animals was a big interest for our students, or those particular students at that school. We used NAPLAN scores and the Common Assessment Task previously to identify the ability of our students, and created a real-world application task that was based around the zoo. So we had our topic of measurement, which was the upcoming topic. We got our interest from our students, which they said they were interested in animals. So we created an assessment task based around the zoo. So we used teacher professional knowledge to create that assessment task. Sometimes it required us to do a bit of research, maybe reach out to the zoo or look online to find some information. But we put all that together, create an assessment task that was based on where the students were at with their learning, and then obviously put it into place in the classroom. So Scott and I, what does that look like in the classroom? So these application tasks. So I mentioned the zoo the one application task, and Scott mentioned the movies. So creating an application task, there are a number of key steps you need to do in order to do that. So the key thing is to break down the topics, which we're going to go into a bit later, a key example, using our case studies of how we did that. But breaking down the key skills, investigating how those key skills, I guess, map to something that students are interested in. So for me, the zoo, so how a particular key skill in measurement would relate to something at the zoo. And then put into place creating with your team a number of different pages of skill activities for the students to complete in the task. It's really important that we differentiate this application task, allowing the students to have multiple entry and exit points, as you can see from the document there.
Yeah, so ultimately what we're trying to do is not just get caught into getting bound to teach just to the textbook. We're looking at, because within textbooks we know it's just really strong rote learning focus. And yes, it has its importance in the classroom, but that doesn't have any impact or relevance to the real world. So it's about bringing that real world into our curriculum and really bringing that student voice into it. So as Adam said, just to break that down a little bit further, you've got all the key knowledge and skills for each topic. How can I then get an application task, or look at it, if you're unsure of that terminology, like a project-based learning task? How could I link that to this topic? That's what we're ultimately trying to develop. So we've chosen, so I'll do it for movies, and so the chosen topic was movies, list some of the key skills. So obviously I'm doing it for trigonometry. So you're looking at your various aspects of trigonometry, side lengths, angles, etc. I'm not going to list them all for us right now. Then looking at the student background is a key component of that. So again, various classes or various students are going to have different skills and access points. So it's about making sure that we identify where they're at, because obviously I may have to teach some of the Year 8 stuff material, or you might have a quite strong group where you need to be looking at the extension stuff that you're going to be adding to your application task. So then about how hard those questions are going to be, and look within your application task that you're developing. Again, you want all students to have access to this. That's a key component. If students no longer have access into it, they're going to become disengaged within that, and that's exactly what we don't want. We want them engaged and continually wanting to learn in that mathematics.
So going on from student interests, now we want to start linking these interests that they have to the curriculum. So you can see from the steps there, it's about finding what actually what maps. And sometimes you don't have that understanding yourself as a teacher, maybe, but you would probably have someone in your team that maybe would have that understanding. And if no one in your team has an understanding, so for example with me, about the zoo, how a particular measurement skill maps to something at the zoo, well then I would obviously reach out, look on the internet, reach out to the zoo, find out some information, do a little bit of research. Sometimes it's going to take a bit of research on behalf of the teachers.
And that's sorry, just to interrupt quickly, but that's that Michael Jordan analogy right there, that using the team and what we've got around us. So I might be an expert and have a really strong passion in animals and zoos, so obviously I can bring a lot more to that team. So when we're going about developing this task, I know when I go to the zoo, I regularly go to the zoo with my daughters, so I can kind of go, so at the zoo, my daughters love the brand new tiger exhibit, etc. And I noticed that they changed this. Wouldn't it be really cool to see the area within that, whatever it may be that you're trying to find? So really bringing in, you're all going to bring in your own expertise within your teams. So really utilizing them to get the most out of your overall application task.
Well, that's how we started this whole thing to start with. I was doing something in the classroom. Scott was doing something in his classroom. You could see the excitement that was happening in the classroom. These students in his class were doing something outrageously fun, and they were just making this noise, and I wanted to go see what they were doing. And the same thing happened to me. Some of my students were doing an activity, and he walked past my class and said, "Oh, great! Wouldn't it be great to bump heads together and maybe share the workload, but also share resources?" And obviously, as Scott said, he may have an understanding of a topic that I don't, and I can reach out to him, and vice versa. So it's really important that we do have that teamwork. A couple of final steps in the assessment task is to allow the students to apply their understanding outside of the classroom. So one of the big draw cards for this whole application task, yes, the students are going to be engaged because it's something they're interested in. They just said they're interested in animals. They're going to love the zoo. Okay, they wouldn't say they're not interested in animals if they're not going to like the zoo. But what does that mean at the end? They've done all this work to do with the zoo, but how are they really going to, I guess, know if what they're calculating, all their calculations, are they actually correct? Are they true? Are the assessment tasks we put together, is it false? And what I mean by that is, if I'm looking at, so for an example, I'm talking about the elephant enclosure, and I'm talking about maybe the amount of water that the elephants drink in a day, I may have got that information, put it in the assessment task, but the students then is just taking that off me. They're actually going, is that information true? One way they can obviously find out if the information is true is to look on the internet and do a bit of research themselves, which they would do. But one big draw card is to perhaps have an excursion outside the classroom. So maybe I would take my kids and maybe the team of teachers to the zoo so that really they can instill that understanding and ask questions of the zookeepers to find out, yes, this application task does have, I guess, real world aspects that do apply to them, and they can really, I guess, instill that understanding and knowledge.
Yeah, it's really about that merit. So the maths that we've then taught, they'll be able to actually see that it is actually in that real world. So again, the example with the movies. So I talked about the angle of the seating that we would have in theatres. And then students really going out and exploring, is that actually the angle that they actually do have them set out for prime viewing experience? Even if you fudged the data as such and you said this is going to be the maths, students usually find that quite enjoyable to find what the real actual data may look like and what those real angles of the cinema really is, for example.
So I'm going to talk a bit about my example here. So when I worked with that Year 8 team, the first thing we did was we broke down the skills that are required at a Year 8 level. So we focused on Year 8s, but also then we're going to incorporate some of the skills that students would need in Year 8. So maybe that we got Year 7 skills or Grade 6 skills, and also how we could extend the skills into Year 9 and Year 10 where possible. So you can see in the presentation, we obviously have the progression points mixed with the key examples from the zoo. So as a team, we kind of sat down and discussed how do these perimeter units, areas, volume units, how do they relate to something at the zoo? And you can see there food amounts is a big one, the water, medicine to be given to the animals. And we keep going down, we can see that we have perimeter, area, volume. There's a number of different skills that we needed to cover in Year 8. And then on the right there, you can see how we would, I guess, map that to something at the zoo. So to make it, kind of give it a bit of a theme, a project-based assessment. And then at the end there, we discussed and talked about taking the students to the zoo so they can investigate their findings. And obviously we organised with the zookeepers there to find out whether what they were calculating, was it correct? They could really ask those questions and get feedback from the zookeepers.
So what does this overall project-based assessment look like? This is just a very tiny snapshot of what the movies one looks like that I've been speaking about. So as you can kind of see, it's just I always kind of do it in a case study type format. So I've got like an overall scenario, and then within that you kind of break down and making sure you cover all those various aspects, key skills, and knowledge within that topic. Obviously and also has the various access points. So it may start this is a Year 9 one, so I had Year 8 material within it, all the way through to, I know I've included things like unit circles and stuff like that, which would be more of a Year 10, even Year 11 aspect of trigonometry. So you basically have a booklet as such that you developed that's going to coincide with the actual material that you are going to be teaching. So you'll be teaching, if you are teaching directly from the textbook, for example, you'll be teaching that material, but then also along with that, you've also got this assessment or application task that's going with it. We're not saying this has to be a CAT or a common assessment task of any sort, but it's just saying that at a task that's got linking that real world application to what the actual classroom looks like and the material that they're going through and what you scaffold in that class.
So following on from this, we have the achievement aspect. So students have that, we've created this assessment, we've translated it into something that they're interested in, but then we also now need to look at the success they're going to get and the growth they're going to get. So we've kind of blended, we're going to talk a bit about what it looks like in the classroom, but we like to break down our lessons. So I know in particular at certain schools, some schools have 6 lesson fortnights, 7 lesson, 8 lesson fortnights. They're all quite different, but we also like to, when we work with schools, talk about how can we break down those lessons into having skill-based lessons and also lessons that teachers and students can work on these application tasks. Those application tasks kind of confirm what they've learned with the skills and allow them to apply it.
And look, so basically what we're doing, that scaffolded teaching and that rote learn from the textbook is getting applied in a real world task, and they're able to extend on their skills. So they've got to a certain point, okay, the data projector said it's tilted this way, I need to be able to work out what that angle is. How do I go about doing that? So it's giving them that intrinsic motivation to go, okay, when I'm teaching, this is how you find the angles within a triangle. They're seeing that okay, this is now going to link to this particular question. I can now not only solve that, I'm also going to be engaged enough that I want to then apply that to that application task.
So what does a typical week look like in a classroom using the STAR methodology? So we're breaking this down into 4 steps. The first step being planning and connecting with our students. So we want to have time, we want to break up our lessons into, say, a 3-4 split if you have 7 lessons, where you would have time to work on your application tasks, but also time to really focus on the key skills, because we know as math teachers, we need time to allow students to have that kind of rote learning and scaffolding periods where they can really get in, delve into the key skills that they need to have. Applying and investing is the second step, where you want to kind of identify those skills, allow students to learn those skills, but then apply them to the task. So you kind of want to spend maybe 1 or 2 lessons learning about a measurement skill, maybe about perimeter or area, and maybe doing some scaffolding on the board, doing some activities, differentiating in your classroom, and then having a couple of follow-up lessons where they would actually apply those skills in that measurement task. So looking at the zoo, how do those area and perimeter questions work, and can they actually answer them? Okay, so the third part being differentiating, clarifying common misconceptions. So they've gone from spending a couple lessons on the skill, a couple of lessons applying their skill, but maybe they are not fully understanding maybe they've got some challenging parts they need to ask questions. That's when you go back to the skills and say, okay, where are you finding, maybe do a starter activity at the start of the lesson or do a hinge question, find out where they're struggling and focus on that differentiation. And then we go back to the application task and look at, okay, now they've gone through the skill-based lessons, they've gone through the application task, maybe jump back between skill and application tasks so they really have a good understanding of the skills. They've had the opportunity to apply their skills to the real world. But now let's take them outside the classroom. Let's take them out, take them to the zoo, really get to ask those questions, and then come back to school and really review and celebrate that success.
So just before we talk about some of these examples, I think like time poor always comes up as a key component when we start to talk about that breakdown and what it may look like. And I understand that as teachers, we are extremely time poor, and we're not only within our entire day, but also we're time poor by what the curriculum governs us to be teaching. So what we can say is by adding an actual real world application task, it's minimizing some of the other, I guess, things in the classroom to take away from our teaching. I.e., if you have poor behavior in the classroom, you're not going to be teaching 70 minutes just because a chunk of that time is going to be allocated to you having to deal with that poor behavior and addressing that so you can go back to that instruction. If you can eliminate that poor behavior by having students that are engaged in the classroom, you can spend more time teaching that relevance and really having those extension classes where you're having those challenging conversations where questioning becomes a key component. So that's where this becomes highly important, because kids are no longer going to say, you're not going to be challenged as such. I don't want to learn this. I don't see the relevance in this. I don't care about this topic anymore, because you're giving them a direct application task or direct relevance to a real world thing that they've got, saying this is the maths, can you show me and prove that this is correct? Some examples of where we've gone about that.
I'd go on to that, thinking back to our opening couple of statements. So we had 2 different classrooms there. Scott talked about having a classroom that I guess wasn't behavior-wise, wasn't challenging, but they were just not connecting to the class. They weren't connecting to the curriculum. My class that I talked about was they were really disengaged and they were little hell raisers in the classroom. Having these application tasks does, I guess, it kind of fixes those problems, but also in regards to being time poor, you're able to move through the curriculum a lot quicker. So as teachers, we're able to move through the curriculum because we're not spending time kind of disciplining our students or getting them to turn up on class, kind of trying to engage them. We've already got that engagement aspect. So they're kind of bums on seats. They're ready to go, ready to learn. And I guess we kind of answer that question about, are you being time poor?
Yeah. So breaking this down, so we're just going to give you some examples that you can kind of have a look at of how we've applied various application tasks throughout the various curriculum. I think this is for Year 8 and Year 9 curriculum. So for number, for example, we used the Facebook example this year, and we've also used ones like touring with the band, algebra, maybe basketball, etc., etc., etc. As you guys can have a quick read through these now. But ultimately, these have all come because of student voice. and where their interests are. If you start to use in your own interests, you may narrow the audience that it's going to appeal to. And ultimately, you want to try and get the biggest, as I said before, the biggest bang for buck and really get a real broad buy-in by your group. So that's why these will be continually adapting. So it's not necessarily you have to do one of these for every single unit. You may start off well, I'm going to do it for 1 or 2 units in this first year. And then the next year, you may find it's a common interest, so you can expand on them and so on and so on. And eventually you would get to a stage where for each of the units, which we have now, a really large bank of application tasks across the various year levels. And then really the excitement then comes is, was it successful and can we use it again and what modifications can we get, which is going to be that final step that we're going to talk about in a moment. But that really is an exciting part because kids are then going to see that relevance in it. And then you start to get that classroom where students are highly engaged in the class and they're really motivated. And we're going back to that, I guess, that scenario that we're not used to, where we walk in and kids are already ready to go, that they're highly engaged in that mass, where it's not common practice or commonly seen in particularly like a year 8 or year 9 classroom, but it can happen.
Thinking back to, again, when we kind of first met and discussed these ideas, we were teaching a particularly challenging year level at year 9, and we were finding our classes were getting engaged, and they were making noise, but they were making fun noise, and they were actually getting some great scores. And Scott started to notice that. I started to notice that about Scott's class, and then other teachers started to notice that about us. That what we were doing with our class was really changing the way we taught, the way the students learned, and other teachers wanted to get on board. So it's kind of like, it's an exciting time. It's great to build your interest into the classroom. There's a whole number of reasons that it's really positive. So going on from the application task, we don't solely work around application tasks. It's really important that we do still test the key skills. So we still use topic tests and CATs. We also use our STAR application task, and obviously keep going with our formative assessment along the way. So it's really important that you have that continual understanding of your students about where they're at. So a topic test for us when we work together, and then we like to share with other schools, would be something that relates to our students, in that you want to make sure you have levels. You want to make sure you go low enough in a topic test that all students can access, but also go high enough that it's open-ended and that the higher end students feel challenged. That's right.
It needs to be differentiated so that you're exploring and challenging all the breadth of your entire cohort. Because ultimately, ideally, analysing the data for one class is great, but if you can start to put it all together, it's because a test obviously going to be a common assessment task. So if you can start to link those together, you can really get a really great understanding of where a cohort is at for a particular topic, and also within a teacher-wise, so within a class where they're at, and the next stage of where something you may need to come back to if time permits, or something that you can go about giving to teachers in future years. So for year 10, they're particularly strong at measurement. However, trigonometry we know may be something that has to come up. So when you get to that topic, they can make informative choices to really support our students in that future years.
So what does differentiation look like in the classroom? So Scott mentioned differentiation in the tests, but we use differentiation in the application task, but it's also important to look at how we differentiate in the classroom, kind of like with an ongoing approach. So a couple of the key skills we look at, strategies we have in our teaching, I guess, toolbox, is allowing our students to connect with the curriculum. That's a huge one. If our students can connect with the curriculum, whether it be the topic test, the application task, that kind of is a big win for your classroom. But it's really important that you have a kind of progressive tasks, ongoing assessments, and flexible paced learning. So students obviously learn in different ways. They learn at different speeds. You need to have a variety of resources, such as online resources, textbook activities, group work, and also have some verbal opportunities for the students to really talk about their learning. So these are just some of the strategies that we use within the classroom that we have found kind of very powerful, and we thought it was very important that we shared it with you.
The final step of the STAR methodology is the review process, where we're going about obtaining feedback from our students One, not only from where they're currently, their progress, but two, also on the application task itself. So you can go about improving and continuing to utilizing its effect in the classroom. When we talk about student growth and making sure you analyze where students are, and you can do that through examining data, so looking at the pre and post tests that you may have, also using book work or various feedback strategies that you would have had along the way. It's important to continually review where students are so you can help minimize those gaps in their learning. Once you have identified those gaps, you can then go about implementing intervention programs, worksheets, whatever it may be, tutoring, etc., to help them for future years so that when they get to, again, that pointy end, they're very limited so they can have a high success rate at the VCE end. It's also important to reflect on student engagement, not only within the actual classroom itself, but also from attendance and also the interactions that you've had with them along the way. Are they always, is their questioning relevant? Are they showing that relevant engagement that you want? Is there that bums on seats that Adam has mentioned before? And if there's not, what adjustments could been done? You can also take the time to reflect on what did my classroom look like next to Adam's classroom? And I know that that's where peer observations would come in an important factor within this. And again, that's something else that as staff we're quite resistant to because we don't like our own teaching practice being analysed. But if you start to look at it that it's only about we're trying to improve our student outcomes and identifying key components in the class that you want to have looked at and observed, you can really start to really improve your own practice and each other's practice and really get the most for the group, which is what we want. And that's where that team review could be a strong link to that. So you've got the professional learning teams or professional learning culture, the PLC communities. That feedback that you would have within them, that's going to be highly important along that way. The whole moderation about what we found was successful. And however your school has that implemented, if it was a weekly, fortnightly, whatever it may be type process, it's really important to continually track not only how you're going, but also how your students are going so you can make changes along the way. Nothing's cemented as such. Like the application can be adjusted along the way, the same as your course would be adjusted along the way. Like I really found that my kids really struggled with how to find angles inside a triangle. I may spend time on that at future lesson. You're not just going to continue to drive past that. Otherwise, you're going to lose, and those gaps in that knowledge is really going to start extending. Also important to share with the college and community. I think that's about it, celebrating that success. So really celebrate the success with your students, with the community. I'm thinking about parents as well. So really celebrating the students' success and achievement they've had.
Yeah, great. So Scott just has mentioned that data of students is really important, sharing that data with their students, but also the successes with the parents and the community. One of the key examples that we like to share with you guys and our presentations is on our early days, we created an assessment task together and also with our Year 9 team based around linear equations. And we looked at how a comet was coming down to Earth and how we would shoot a rocket from Earth to obviously get to that comet and I guess blow it up, and then what kind of impact that would have if the comet made it to Earth, and we could look at the equations. It was quite an in-depth assessment. We thought it was fantastic. We kind of showed snippets of Deep Impact, the movie, because we enjoyed that growing up, and we showed that to our students, and we thought it was going to be a fantastic application task, but
what a flop it was.
It was a terrible assessment. Students didn't connect. They'd never seen the movie. They kind of connected with the idea of rockets and that, but obviously linear relationships is a tough one to get across to your students.
Yeah. We like again, so as Adam said, they had connections to it, but the main component of that being that Deep Impact movie, they had no relevance to. So actually this year, I took that same principle with the rockets and again, that love of movies that I've mentioned before in TV shows, I applied that same scenario, but just twisted it slightly and applied it to The Simpsons. And The Simpsons have a comet that comes down to hit Springfield. that one change in the scenario greatly brought in the interest from my group. And although the application task itself was identical to that one that we had limited success with, that change at the case study has had great success this year, where students were really bought in and engaged in that across the entire cohort. So it's about don't be scared of those hit and misses. It's about how can you improve them for next time.
That's it. Don't be afraid to fail. That's what we found. That application task didn't work, so we didn't throw it away. We didn't just disregard all those lessons. We kind of put a lot of work into that. We just put it to the side just until we could think about a different way we could introduce it to our students. And as you can see, Scott has real success with using The Simpsons and using Springfield. So some of the reflections we've had from our students, because obviously it's great to get the feedback from our students. A lot of the students have made these comments over time. They're not comments that are recent. Some of them are. I know that recently I've been focusing on, with my current Year 8 class, sharing data with assessments. I know it's been difficult with COVID and remote teaching, but when I ran an assessment with my students, not only do I provide feedback on the test and their key skills, but it's also great to show them the cohort and how the strengths and weaknesses the class has and what we can really focus on. Because then when I do follow-up lessons, they understand why we're really focusing on covering up, going over some of these measurement skills before moving on to the next topic. And you can see, so some of the students really enjoy them knowing that I understand where they're at with their learning. They know what to work on when they go home. If they're struggling, they know that they're going to get that support from me. So that was some of the reflections that I've received in the past.
Yeah, look, and some teacher ones have also been highly rewarding. Look, I know what you want to try and do is you want teachers to be excited about what they're teaching. And I guess that's a key principle within this, and that's what we're trying to bring, like that. By having, if a classroom is highly engaged and motivated, obviously your teacher interest is going to be higher within the classroom, and so it's been really rewarding to see not only directly within their classroom to have successes in that and how they've gone about improve student outcomes through this methodology, but also how they can then get to work together and really build a strong, cohesive group team. That recognizing if we all work together, we can then get success not only within my own classroom, but obviously across that entire year level. So that's been really rewarding. And really it's taking staff away from just teaching directly from the textbook. We're providing a way that you can apply real world context alongside with the conventional method that Mass has been trained to use, like just directly rote learning out of a book.
I know one of the comments that I've often received from working with schools is that our methodology isn't that far off what they're currently doing. They just didn't have that direction or a way to put it into action. Sometimes schools have used our methodology to review their current curriculum, so they review their current methods with their teams. So Scott talked about earlier having professional learning teams within their school, and schools already look at data and schools already look at how they can engage their kids in the classroom. But our methodology is being used in schools such as that to really break down their lessons and break down a unit and how they can really apply our methodology to what they're currently doing and I guess adapt and make it better. And also bringing that whole idea of an excursion, because I know a number of schools don't ever run excursions in maths. It's not a common thing to have your kids go outside of school and investigate maths in the real world. And I think that's something that needs to happen a bit more, because then it I guess builds that engagement for students, but also engagement in the community. Other people start to see, there isn't a lot of maths involved in what I do, and how can I share that with the students? So it's a really powerful statement.
So what does success look like? By implementing the STAR methodology. So just within this, look, we've helped implemented this not only within our own colleges, but across various colleges. There have been marked improvements in VCE results and NAPLAN scores in particular. This is through a few major contributors. There's obviously been less absences in the classroom. There's been positive student feedback, and there's obviously been greater VCE participation in future years. So if you're thinking about if they're more engaged in the class, they're more likely to then want to be attending class. Therefore, you've got more teaching hours that you can have that explicit teaching to them. So therefore their skills and knowledge is going to be increasing. So when you get to those NAPLAN tests and your VCE tests, they're going to perform stronger. Also, because they're getting to the senior end, so year 10, where they're starting to really select what maths pathway they're going to be going down, because they've got a greater in-depth and prior knowledge across vast amount of areas now, we've had more experience of them really going towards those more challenging mathematics, so like your methods and specialists, and having success in that. While at the same time, if they're following that further, they've got the structures there to have a high amount of success across further as well. So school attitudes surveys. So this is just a very quick look at some data. And as you can kind of see, this is just from a few collections of schools. Pre the STAR program being there, and then after the STAR methodology was implemented. There's a few key ones that we like really highlighting, like stimulating learning. As you can see, the percentages were right down what students were perceiving as stimulating by the implementation of student voice in particular. You can see that's really kind of lifted to 98%. Also, that goes in conjunction, as you can see, student motivation increases. They see teacher effectiveness increasing. Obviously, student voice is linked towards that. The engagement of delivery. So it's all part and parcel with each other. So once you kind of get elements that they like to see within your curriculum, they start, and they've seen that relevance, they're more connected to not only their peers, but they're connected to the material and what you are teaching, and you get a lot more success in and out of your classroom.
To get that success, you can obviously see from this slide, the number of hours has increased. So these were taken from schools that we worked with in the past. You can see that in some cases, there was 25 periods missed in total for students in a particular year level. And you can see here how the periods have, over the course of time, how that impacts the class. With students not being in that class, they're missing out on valuable skills and understanding. And I guess that connected with the teacher, they connected with their peers, all the interesting things that Scott spoke about before. It's not happening if they're not in the classroom.
Yeah. So this particular school obviously was looking at, they had attendance concerns, and they were trying to see how can we get more motivation or more engagement in that class. So as you can kind of see, so that's that 4-year period of implementing that STAR methodology. That 17 more hours of explicit teaching in your class is going to get better results. It's going to ensure that students are ultimately, when they get to that end, have a deeper knowledge and understanding of that material. So the more, and if that can continue to increase, it can only escalate even more improvement and greater results.
So how do you find out more? So we've talked to you a lot about our STAR methodology. It's something we've spent a number of years going over and kind of perfecting and implementing in schools. And we feel like we need to share that more with our community. That's why we obviously wanted to present here today. We also have an upcoming ebook being released. We've been working hard on that throughout this year. It's been a bit of a mixed year, especially being in schools and working on tasks together. So it has been a bit challenging, but we do have an ebook coming out, which is going to be an in-depth look about how we take a particular new teacher or a particular experienced teacher through our methodology and how they incorporate that methodology within their own classroom, but also how they would work with a team of teachers and how they make change with their students, build change with their students, and I guess get that success that we've experienced and we've experienced with other schools. So stick around, and we'll obviously have that coming out soon, and we're excited to share that with you.
Look, hopefully we've been able to give you some valuable insight into how you can go about implementing the STAR methodology and really applying that project-based learning, I guess, task alongside of your current curriculum. If you obviously want to find out anything further or more, by all means, please make sure you reach out and contact us. As we've mentioned, we have worked with various schools in various settings. So we're happy to continue to do that and really share expertise with what we've had as success and where our failures may have been. And we're not about hiding that. It's about how we can go about improving and recognizing as the teacher profession, how we can continue to all improve across the entire board.
Again, thank you for sticking around for our presentation. We really wanted to give you a snapshot of our methodology and how you can take that away and I guess apply that in your own school, in your own teaching, or perhaps with your own team. So please reach out to us if you do have any questions. And yeah, hopefully we will see you in the future.
Thank you very much. We're now hanging around for a couple more minutes just for any questions that people may have. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam and Scott. Thank you, Adam and Scott, for your valuable insights into your experiences. On behalf of MAV, I would like to thank you for your keynote today. Also, I would like to thank Oxford University Press for supporting this keynote today. We'll now take a quick break. Don't forget to check out the virtual delegate satchel and to touch base with our sponsor and exhibitors. Next session will commence at 10:25.